Welcome back. This is the seventh and final lesson in the consistent underwater edit. We have worked through white balance, exposure, presence, color, and masking. Now we reach final adjustments. And this last step is different. We are not going to try and restart the edit or find one more Lightroom tool to use. We are deciding whether the photograph is already working, what small refinements it still needs, how our own visual style should influence those final choices, and how the image should be prepared for where it is going. Most importantly, we need to know when to stop. The principle for this lesson is simple. Final adjustments should polish, not restart. So before we touch another control, let's define what final adjustments are supposed to do. Final adjustments are the last step in the workflow, but they are not a second edit. By this point, white balance, exposure, presence, color, and masking should already be doing their jobs. That means when we arrive here, we are not trying to rescue the photograph. We are checking an image that already works and looking for small refinements that make it feel complete. Maybe that means a final crop check. Maybe it means cleaning up small distractions near the edge. Maybe it means backing off color or contrast that now feels a little heavy. But if you find yourself rebuilding the whole edit at this stage, that is usually a signal to go back and diagnose which earlier step actually owns the problem. Final adjustments should polish an edit that is already working. So before we make any more adjustments, the next move is to step away from the controls and look at the photograph as a whole. One of the easiest mistakes to make in Lightroom is to become so focused on individual adjustments that we stop seeing the photograph as a whole. At the final adjustment stage, the first move is not another slider. The first move is to step back and look at the whole image again. Ask yourself, where does my eye go first? Does the subject still lead? Does the photograph feel balanced? Is anything pulling attention away from the subject? Did I miss anything near the edges or corners? And has anything been pushed further than the photograph actually needs? Those questions change the way we edit. We are no longer searching for more tools to use. We are evaluating whether another adjustment is truly necessary. If something still needs attention, diagnose it. Decide whether it belongs here as a final refinement or whether it points back to an earlier step in the workflow. Then move on. Once we've evaluated the whole photograph, the next question is what, if anything, still needs refinement. Once the whole photograph is evaluated, the next question is not how many Lightroom tools you can use. It is what, if anything, still needs refinement. Most final adjustments should be small. You may notice something near the edge of the frame. You may decide the crop needs one last check. You may see a small tonal or color distraction. Or you may realize that something you already pushed needs to be backed off. That last point matters. Sometimes the best final adjustment is not adding something. It is reducing an adjustment that now feels too strong. The goal here is not to prove how much editing you know. The goal is to finish the photograph. So the question becomes, will this change make the image meaningfully better? If it will, make the refinement. If it will not, leave it alone. Now that we have limited final adjustments to only what the photograph needs, let's talk about one of the most important parts of finishing, personal visual style. Now that we have limited final adjustments to only what the photograph needs, we can talk about one of the most important parts of finishing, personal visual style. Style is not a preset. It is not copying somebody else's look, and it is not applying the same treatment to every photograph. Personal style develops from repeated choices. How natural or dramatic do you want the image to feel? How do you handle color? Do you prefer softer contrast or stronger tonal interpretation? How much detail do you keep? How tightly do you compose? What mood do you want the viewer to experience? The workflow gives you structure, but your choices create the style. That means the goal of the system is not to make your photograph look like mine. The goal is to help you make better decisions about your own photographs more consistently. But that brings up an important distinction. Consistency does not mean every photograph should look the same. After talking about personal style, there is one important distinction I want to make very clear. Consistency does not mean every photograph should look the same. It does not mean every image gets the same color, the same contrast, the same crop, or the same mood. Consistency means you return to the same decision path. White balance, exposure, presence, color, masking, and final adjustments give you a reliable way to think through the photograph. But within that structure, the final choices can change. One image may need a natural, restrained finish. Another may benefit from stronger contrast. Another may need a softer interpretation because of the subject, the light, or the final destination. The consistency is how you decide, not in forcing every photograph into the same look. Now that the creative edit is finished, we need to ask where the photograph is going. Now that the creative edit is finished, we need to ask a practical question. Where's this photograph going? A finished edit and a finished deliverable are not always the same thing. The photograph may look finished in Lightroom, but the file may still need to be prepared differently depending on whether it is going to social media, your website, a screen presentation, a print, or a video slideshow. That destination can affect the crop, the aspect ratio, the dimensions, the file format, the color space, and the output sharpening. A vertical social media post, a website image, a print file, and a video frame do not all need the same preparation. So the sequence is important. First, finish the photograph. Then create the delivery version that fits where the photograph is actually going. This is still part of final adjustments because completion is not just about how the photograph looks. It is also about whether it is prepared correctly for its final use. That brings us to an important habit, keeping the master edits separate from the delivery versions. Once the photograph itself is finished, the next habit is to keep the master edit separate from the delivery versions. The master edit is your finished creative photograph. That is the version where color, tone, detail, crop, and visual style all feel complete. From that master, you can prepare different delivery versions. One version may be cropped for social media. Another may be sized for your website. Another may be prepared for print. Another may be sized for video or slideshow. Those versions are not four separate creative edits. They are four different preparations of one finished photograph. This is an important distinction because it keeps you from redesigning the image every time the destination changes. The destination may affect the crop, dimensions, file format, color space, and output sharpening, but it should not force you to restart the edit. First, finish the photograph. Then prepare the correct version for where it is going. But before you export, there is one last evaluation we need to make. Have you gone too far? Before you export the photograph, there is one more question to ask. Have I gone too far? This is especially important with underwater photography. Water takes away color, contrast, and clarity, so it is very easy to keep pushing the edit because we are trying to get those things back. But correction can turn into exaggeration. Color can become too strong. Contrast can become too heavy. Detail can start to look crunchy. Mask can become visible. The water can stop looking believable. So at this stage, step back and look at the photograph as a viewer would see it. Does the water still feel natural? Do the colors belong to the scene? Does the subject look believable? Are your corrections invisible? Or can someone still tell you adjusted the image? Final adjustments should support the photograph. They should not call attention to the editing. If another change will not make the image meaningfully better, the best decision is to stop. That brings us to one of the most important skills in the entire workflow, knowing when the photograph is actually finished. The final step is harder than it sounds. Lightroom will always give you something else you could adjust. Another slider, another mask, another crop, another color decision. But possibility is not the same thing as necessity. At this point, the question is no longer, what else can I do? The better question is, will another adjustment make this photograph meaningfully better? If the answer is yes, make the adjustment carefully. If the answer is no, the photograph is finished. This is where the full decision framework comes back one more time. Diagnose, decide, move on. You diagnose whether something actually needs attention. You decide whether changing it will improve the photograph, and then you move on. At the end of the workflow, move on does not mean go to another Lightroom panel. It means stop editing, export the photograph, and go diving again. Now, let's close the full 7-part system and talk about where we go next. That brings us to the end of the consistent underwater edit. Across this series, we build a complete workflow: white balance, exposure, presence, color, masking, and final adjustments. But the real lesson was never just the list of steps. The real lesson was how to think through an underwater photograph in the right order. Diagnose, decide, move on. White balance creates the foundation. Exposure balances the light. Presence adds definition. Color refines the image. Masking handles local problems. Final adjustments bring the process to a deliberate finish. Now that the system is complete, the next step is to put it to work on real photographs. That is why the next series will be the Underwater Edit Clinic. Instead of simply talking about tools, we'll look at real underwater editing problems and ask, what is actually wrong? Which part of the workflow owns the problem? What decision should we make next? And how do we know when it worked? The goal will not be to give you another recipe. The goal will be to help you think through the photograph. If you want to keep learning, follow the weekly blog. Download the free 10 Lightroom Fixes guide. Join the Underwater Lightroom Mastery Priority List. And subscribe here on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and until next time, dive safely, shoot with purpose, and edit with intention.